Hi, I'm Mike Chessin, retired botany professor from the University of Montana, and recently I had a little booklet of poems published called Yippy Yedish, From the Bronx to the Big Sky. None of the poems is in the Yiddish language itself, although I may try to do some of that in the future, but it simply represents my passage as a child growing up in New York, and then my coming to Montana eventually to teach at the university in Missoula. And so we call it From the Bronx to the Big Sky. You see from the picture on the front is a picture of me on a little pony taken when I was about 3 or 4 years old on my street on Monterey Avenue in the Bronx, New York, and I call it From the Bronx, quotes, to the Big Sky. What prompted me to get started on this was a book that I was thumbing through called Pioneer Jews of the West by Harriet Rocklin and Harriet and Fred Rocklin, and I was struck as I was thumbing through it by a reproduction of one of Charlie Russell's most famous paintings, Waiting for a Chinook, or Last of the 5,000. I was puzzled by its connection to pioneer Jews. It turns out that Russell had worked on the ranch co-owned by one Louis Kaufman when he witnessed the devastating effects of a blizzard on their livestock. I think many of you remember that painting. Somehow I was inspired to write a poem about that story, and since I was retired from teaching, it was followed by the other 9 poems included in this collection. Most, but not all, do have a Jewish connection. So I became a cowboy poet, so-called, although aside from having resided in Montana since 1949, my only other qualification might stem from a nearly year-long stint as a ranch hand near Fallbrook, California in 1941 and 1942. And here on the back cover of this little booklet is a picture of me riding a tractor on that ranch in 1942. Maybe I could read that poem first, the one about the Charlie Russell and Louis Stadler. I call it Charlie and Louie, or Waiting for a Chinook. And I might say that the Phelps that I mentioned in this poem was a manager of the ranch co-owned by Kaufman and on which Charlie Russell had worked for a while as a ranch hand and foreman. Charlie and Louie, or Waiting for a Chinook. His name was Louis Kaufman. From overseas he came to seek that fabled golden land for fortune, perhaps fame. For many countless centuries his people had been oppressed, but here in Sagebrush country he looked and said, "We're blessed." He found a willing partner in Stadler and his spread. Together they formed the Bar R Ranch, and many a settler was fed. Before he was world famous, Charlie Russell worked there too. It was Charlie and Louie between them, a friendship tried and true. 'Twas the famous freeze of '87, and Charles was wintering there, when Louie in our capital city wrote Phelps, "How did you fare?" The weather had been a killer, the cattle did die like flies, and Phelps could write no letter to describe that awful demise. But CMR was there too, and quickly asked for a pad, and before you could bat an eyelash, he'd painted that picture sad. Poor Louie, he saw the painting, when the letter from Phelps he found. Without a word he hit the bar, his sorrows indeed he drowned. And Charlie then got famous, but I thought you'd like to know that a Kaufman played an important part in that story some years ago. Well, that was my first effort, and from then things just flowed, and incidentally, this is the famous picture of the cattle on that ranch waiting for a Chinook that was the basis for Charlie's famous painting, and you can see it in the booklet itself. I had a colleague when I first came to the University of Montana in 1949 called Joe Kramer. He was a very interesting person, and it made an indelible mark on me and many others, and many of his students that he taught here while he was a botany professor. And I felt moved to write a little poem about him. And I call it A Grove Called Kramer Pines. High up in the Bitterroot Valley, you remember from John Denver's song, there's a grove of trees called Kramer Pines. Please hear me, it won't be too long. Joseph Kramer had come from Lithuania, in his 20s, still a young lad. After many a trying experience, wound up here, for which we're all glad. He taught botany at the U in Missoula in his fiery and colorful way, and many a forestry student can remember him to this day. Smoky Joe was the nickname they gave him. You can guess the reasons why. Though often enough he made them laugh, there were times they wanted to cry. Over the whole range of science and human affairs, with his old world scholarly way, they learned about plants, but much, much more, with his humor and passion, they say. But when speaking of a particular tree, Joe's lecture was worthy of note. He declared his concern for our own yellow pine. I can almost recite it by rote. Some call it bull pine or jack pine, he said, but its authentic technical name is Pinus ponderosa, he would state, and it's garnered a wee bit of fame. He rolled his R's for all they were worth when pronouncing that mouthful in class, and said, if I'd had a daughter instead, Ponderosa'd be the name of that lass. As it comes to all, Smoky Joe passed away, his love for that tree undiminished. But Bob Steiner, his student, I, as colleague and friend, thought his story was really unfinished. His students were working throughout the West, many in federal employ, so the USFS really came through, their action a source of much joy. For if you happen to visit Montana, out of Darby near Painted Rocks Lake, you may come across that lovely pine grove, a memorial for Joe Kramer's sake. I might say that we had a dedication of that memorial in 1972 at there near Painted Rock Lake. The Forest Service was kind enough to put a plaque there and to maintain it. It's near Overwich Creek, and some of us, I hope, to be able to have a 25th anniversary of Joe Kramer's death next summer sometime at the site of the memorial. Now perhaps I can read a few poems more specifically about Missoula, and this next one I call Shakespeare in the Garden City. Just a few miles east of Missoula, there's a spot that's called Bandman Flats. Though a bull pasture now, in the past white-tailed deer, and at night perhaps a few bats. I wondered for long how that place got its name, till I found, in a roundabout way, there had been a bandman whose first name was Daniel, who'd sought refuge in the old USA. He had to leave Germany, like so many others, after the blow-up in '48, arrived in our West in '63, and went to the mining camp straight. But it wasn't until 1890 Daniel Bandman discovered this place. Believe it or not, here at that early date, a Shakespearean actor you'd face. Yes, he started a school for actors before the century turned, and he planted our very first fruit trees, as widespread respect he had earned. So here's to one of our first pioneers who helped to establish this town. Let's remember our own Daniel Bandman. Let's keep his a name of renown. The next one I call The First Jew in Missoula. They typically came from far away, from across the Atlantic wide, to escape the fear of hunger or lash, to share Columbia's pride. One such was Jacob Leiser. From Germany, his home, after docking in New York City, said Jake, "No more shall I roam." But he was seeking adventure, so around the Horn he went and landed in California. You'd think 'twas heaven sent. But Jacob Leiser was restless still, so off again with pack, he walked a long northeasterly way. Said he, "There's no turning back." He lived off the bounties of nature, and many a native he met. After a long and arduous journey, he stopped at a place near De Smet. Jake put down his roots and opened a store in that well-watered, five-alleyed place. In a spot now known as Missoula, met the Salish face to face. The story, as told by his daughter, describes their dealings as open and fair. Too bad that our treatment of Indian folk to that standard could not always compare. So a toast to Jacob Leiser, a pioneer through and through. Our city's the better because of people like him, for me, and I hope for you too. I'd like to share a little anecdote about a letter I recently received from a friend, a Bulgarian, whom we met in Sofia, Bulgaria, some years ago. And we've kept corresponding with him. He is now in this country. And I sent him a copy of my booklet of poems, and he remarked, specifically with reference to this last poem about Jacob Leiser, that he himself, when he lived in Russia, the Soviet Union, near Odessa, in his small village, he remembers the first Jewish person that came to live there was also a person called Leiser, or Leiser, which I think is a very interesting coincidence. Now, I'd like to turn to perhaps a subject of more general interest, also related to Missoula, and it has it does have a Jewish connection, as you will see, and it also has some topical interest as well. And I call it our university, the prophetic tradition and taxes. They call it the prophetic tradition, derived from Old Testament lore. Part of it says that you care for your neighbor, and truth must come to the fore. Two profs at the U in Missoula can show how the traditions applied, one in a fashion quite positive, another where the traditions denied. One who taught economics, Louis Levine was his name, was ordered by the U System's chancellor to study why support was so lame. The year was 1918, but the situation hasn't changed much. Even then they worried about taxes, the legislature not a soft touch. So the professor began his study, and perhaps to no one's surprise, he found that the company paid not its share because of its power, its size. Now Chancellor Eliot got cold feet and ordered Levine to desist, but the study was ready to publish, and firm did the professor resist. Poor Louis Levine was fired, but the State Board of Ed soon reversed, hired him back with full pay. In glory, Levine was immersed. Well, we've had our share since of outspoken profs for justice ready to fight, but sad to relate, in recent years, there's one who turned hard to the right. Again, the issue was taxes. A movement he led did arise. They claimed they would help the large middle class. Not so fast, you'd rightly surmise. The effects of their efforts so sturdy, the rich the treasury'd raid, and the poor have already suffered as the states cut out much-needed aid. But the prophetic tradition at the U of Montana will win out, of that I'm quite sure. Though each barrel a rotten apple may have, let's chuck it, and so have our cure. Speaking again of the picture of me riding a tractor on the back page of the booklet, on the Lovell Ranch in 1942, when Brian Thornton, the manager of the UC bookstore, who has helped me very much in the production of this and other publishing efforts, asked me for a picture that showed me in a more rural setting, I found this one of me on a tractor on the Lovell Ranch, and when I brought in, Brian said, well, why don't you write a poem about that? So I said, well, okay, I'll try. It's been many years, 45 years or more, but I'll see. And surprisingly, the poem just flowed. Apparently I had a lot of memories, interesting memories of that experience, which were still with me. And I call the poem The Scoundrels on the Lovell Ranch. 'Twas the beautiful summer of '41, still celebrating my Berkeley degree, when there on the beach of Venice, friend Nora from Cal did I see. She introduced me to young Hap Lovell, a vigorous and straightforward lad. He'd heard I just left the College of Ag, made a proposal to me from his dad. Philip Lovell, a noted chiropractor, owned a farm near Hemet, desert town. There they'd produced watermelons galore. Would I sell them with Hap in town? I readily agreed, had not much to do, so we piled that fruit high in a truck and drove all around California south, though we didn't have very much luck. En route, made a stop at Balboa Beach. His family was summering there, and Philip Lovell offered a job on his ranch. Of course I said yes, and asked where. He described the place in Fallbrook, which sounded like paradise, with avocado, sapotes, and grapefruit, cows, turkeys, pigs, chickens, how nice. I can't pay you much, just $1 a day, with a room and board included. It's a beautiful setting, near Mount Palomar, in a valley so quiet and secluded. 'Twas a dream come true, both for me and my dad. He'd yearned for the pure rural life, but as a poor immigrant, he hadn't much choice. 'Twas the city with trauma and strife. Let me introduce you to those who greeted me as I arrived at that bucolic place. There was George Cook, ranch boss, always chewing tobacco, with an open and still handsome face. His wife Marie, Lovell's sister-in-law, quite lively and never a bore, just couldn't adjust to country existence, always aching and with pains galore. Lovell bought the ranch 2 decades ago, but weekend friends had stripped much of his fruit, and some ranch hands, scoundrels they were, who'd stolen him blind to boot. Young co-worker Dave had been one of those scoundrels. How come he still worked there, I thought. He hounded me mercilessly, no matter how hard I tried, my attempts to please him for naught. While there a short while, and riding our Fortson, with hard-hearted Dave at the wheel, he deliberately dumped me. I hit iron bar, and for weeks my sore ribs did feel. Now I've mentioned the ranch was run down, so aside from our regular work, there was many a time, come day or come night, had to fix some defect, some quirk. For example, the piping was really well rusted, so often there'd develop a leak. At times we'd crawl round after midnight, as avidly that break we would seek. Our methods were not very high-tech. In those holes, the right redwood plug, and Brownie, our canine, beside us, could return for more sleep on his rug. There was also that painful adventure, trying to deliver a calf from its mom. In the barn at 2 a.m, we tugged, but it just wouldn't come. The result was fatal for both, but it wasn't the only such show. Another had to do with our big boar called Mike. 'Twas his time to market to go. We had Mike and some mates corralled in a pen, tried to lure them up a ramp to the truck. No matter how hard we tried, Mike did elude us. George Cook could not believe his bad luck. George then got so mad that he reached for his hammer and flung it toward Mike near the fence. It hit that poor boar on the side of the temple, lay down, never heard from him hence. Avocados were our major cash crop. We watered and fertilized much. When we took our poor harvest to Vista, we're told there's little reward for such. At regular monthly intervals, the Cal-Avo agent came by, said do this or that, but mainly the same. There's really nothing new you must try. It was several years later, after leaving the ranch, we learned why that crop was not trove. Dave Lovell, soil scientist, and Phil's firstborn son, set a hard pans beneath that whole grove. The doctor himself had quite a weight problem, so yearly to the ranch he would hie. He worked like a beaver, drank only OJ. The pounds did roll off, I don't lie. During one such visit, and I was still there, Doc had a real special guest. Turned out to be Eslander Robeson, wife of that singer, the best. Put mildly, she had dazzling beauty, as she turned to me and then said, "Why, Mike, I've heard so much about you." You can imagine my face did get red. And through all that year, whenever I could, I'd hike the St. Margaritas. How pristine they were. I'm afraid that's no more, with loads of senors, senoritas. That day in December, between the raindrops, we heard the Pearl Harbor news. I knew that my life be forever changed, no more my direction to choose. As springtime approached, I was restless. Then a letter from SACDO I got. Plant quarantine inspector I could become, checking Okies and Arkies my lot. Well, there's quite a story to tell there, but Fallbrook's the real focus here. I haven't been back, a variety of reasons. New towns, many people, I fear. I hate to admit that my life got so hectic, the Cooks and the Lovells I ignored. I take a vow now, and you are all witness. Those memories I shall ever hoard. Well, the last poem I'd like to read, it's appropriate to read it now because it has to do with an very interesting person in a town in Arizona that we've visited for a month, the month of March, the last couple of years, and we hope to go down again shortly for another month this year. And I call it A Miner and Cactus Collector. Norse Nelson, our driver on the Cabeza Prieta, noting my interest in cactus. "You must meet my friend Jim McGrady," he said, as carefully or an arroyo he backed us. "He has a large cactus collection," Nels stated. "In general, a most interesting guy." So finally we contacted Jim at his home. He invited us both to come by. We went to his house in Ajo one day and were not disappointed one bit. He regaled us in his own inimitable style, with his homespun and charming quick wit. As an Ajo old-timer, he'd worked for Phelps Dodge, but retired ere that terrible strife. Grew plants of the desert, from near and from far. You'd see such but once in your life. He raised them at home first, many from seed. Young organ pipe cactus, a beauty. Those he used not, he gave to his friends. Not to sell them, he felt was his duty. Then out to his ranch, just a few miles from town. 'Twas next to the refuge and wild. The mountains nearby, all jumbled volcanic. No cattle, they just got him riled. For when he took over the property from his brother, a rancher for sure, he cleared it of cattle, raised pupfish instead. He wanted true desert and pure. A small cabin still stands there, vintage 19 and 12, replete with objects so quaint. From cowboys and Indians from south of the border, a picture you'd find hard to paint. Then he took us outside to show us his plants, saguaros, mesquites, palo verde. In his canyon retreat, a large ironwood tree kept a table from getting too dirty. In spite of his physical status and age, he got right to work as we parted. With shovel and pick, dug away at a bank, his everyday project he'd started. We visited Jim with some friends once again. He never failed to amaze us with his populist banter and salty remarks in a way that never would faze us. He spoke of his pair, Kid McGrady, a professional boxer by trade, who fought Benny Leonard, the champ from New York, though my memory of that now does fade. Jim himself had 2 tours in the Navy, his first as a 16-year-old. Served in the Pacific in World War II, again in Korea so cold. After that he dug copper in that company town, where he lives to this very day. With his love of nature, disdain of bombast, on his land do the antelope play. With his transplanted kidney, diabetes to boot, hope he lasts, will return to his place. Took to him like the brother that I'd never had. Jim's a prince of our own human race. Well, I have a few more poems here, which perhaps I can leave for you folks to read. The booklet can be obtained for a very nominal price at some of the bookstores in town. The UC bookstore, Freddie's Feed and Read, and Fact and Fiction downtown. Thank you very much for listening.